The rain poured over downtown Chicago like a curtain of silver threads that afternoon. People rushed beneath umbrellas. Taxis honked in endless rhythm. And the city pulsed with life, hurried, indifferent, and unfeeling. Inside the glass tower of Hartwell Enterprises, the world looked very different. Polished marble floors reflected the light of success. Every step echoed ambition. And at the top of that tower, behind a mahogany desk that could have been mistaken for a throne, sat Mr. Nathaniel Cole, one of the youngest and most powerful CEOs in the country. To the outside world, Nathaniel had everything: a billion-dollar company, respect, luxury cars, and an apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. But those who really knew him, the very few who dared to get close, understood that beneath that perfect suit lived a man who had built his empire on silence and pain. He was an orphan. Once, a boy who grew up in the foster system, never knowing a father's hand or a mother's warmth. Success had become his shield, work his identity. And somewhere along the way, he forgot what it meant to truly feel. That was until the day a little girl walked into his life, soaking wet, holding a pink backpack, and forever changing the meaning of his existence. Chapter 1. The unexpected visitor. It was a Friday, the end of a long week. Nathaniel sat in a board meeting, surrounded by polished executives who spoke in numbers and forecasts. His assistant Clara quietly slipped into the room and whispered something in his ear. "Sir, there's a child in the lobby asking to see you." Nathaniel frowned. "A what?" "A little girl," Clara clarified. "She says it's important." The boardroom went silent. Everyone exchanged amused looks. Nathaniel, ever the man of composure, simply sighed. "Tell security to—" "She has your photo, sir," Clara interrupted softly. That made him pause. Minutes later, Nathaniel stepped into the vast marble lobby, his presence commanding even without effort. Standing near the reception desk was a girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, her brown curls damp from the rain, her big hazel eyes full of both fear and hope. She clutched a crumpled photograph to her chest. When she saw him, her face lit up like sunrise after a storm. "Daddy," she squealed. The entire lobby froze. Nathaniel's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" She ran up to him before he could react, wrapping her small arms around his leg. "Sir," Clara whispered awkwardly. "She said your name. Full name." Nathaniel knelt down slowly. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I'm not your—" But then he saw the photo in her trembling hands. It was an old magazine clipping, his photo, taken from a Forbes feature 5 years ago. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day?" The plea. Her name was Lily, and she smelled faintly of rain and cotton candy. She explained everything in little bursts between sniffles and hiccups. Her real father, a construction worker, had passed away 2 years ago. Her mother, Elena, worked as a janitor in one of Nathaniel's buildings, though he had never met her personally. Tomorrow was Parents' Day at Lily's school, the day every child brought a parent to share stories about their work, their dreams, and their lives. But Lily had no one to bring. "Everyone's gonna laugh at me again," she whispered. "They said I made up my daddy. So I told them he was someone really important. And then I saw you on the magazine at school. You looked kind." Her words hit him like lightning. Kind. No one had called Nathaniel that in years. "Please, sir," she whispered again, her tiny voice trembling with hope. "Just for one day. You don't have to be my daddy, just pretend." Nathaniel stared at her, torn between logic and something deeply human that had long been buried inside him. His assistant whispered, "Sir, this isn't your responsibility." But the little girl looked up at him with eyes that reminded him of his own, back when he was a lonely boy in the system, wishing someone, anyone, would show up. He sighed deeply. "All right, Lily," he said softly. "Just one day. Borrowed sunshine." The next morning, Nathaniel stood outside Brookfield Elementary, feeling strangely nervous for the first time in years. He wore a casual shirt, no suit, no tie, and held Lily's hand as she proudly led him toward her classroom. The walls were decorated with drawings and paper cutouts. Children laughed. Parents chatted. For once, Nathaniel wasn't Mr. Cole, CEO of Hartwell Enterprises. He was just Lily's dad. When it was their turn to speak, Lily ran to the front of the class, her curls bouncing. "This is my daddy," she announced with pride. "He helps people build big buildings and makes sure everyone has a job." The class clapped. Nathaniel smiled, genuinely, for the first time in years. He talked briefly about teamwork, dreams, and never giving up. But as he spoke, he realized something strange. He wasn't pretending anymore. When he looked down at Lily, watching her beam with pride, something in his heart cracked open. It wasn't about pity. It was connection, something pure and unfiltered. The mother after school. Lily insisted he come home for cookies, just like real daddies do. Her home was a small apartment in a worn-down neighborhood, one of Nathaniel's own properties, ironically. When the door opened, he met Elena, Lily's mother. She froze the moment she saw him. "Mr. Cole," she gasped, clutching her apron. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." She must have... Nathaniel raised a hand gently. "It's all right, Ms. Alvarez. She didn't do anything wrong." Elena looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hands calloused from endless cleaning. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. They sat together as Lily served cookies proudly, humming a song under her breath. "I didn't mean to trouble you, sir," Elena said softly. "Lily's been having a hard time. I told her father's watching from heaven, but..." Her voice broke. "She just misses him." Nathaniel looked around. The small apartment, the secondhand furniture, the family photos taped to the wall. It was humble, but it had warmth his penthouse lacked. He stayed longer than he meant to, laughing, helping Lily draw, listening to Elena talk about her dreams. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt... Chapter 5. The gift of presence. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Nathaniel found excuses to visit again. He sponsored Lily's school art supplies. He arranged repairs for their building. But more than that, he showed up, birthdays, school plays. Little moments that didn't make headlines but changed lives. He didn't tell anyone at work. It wasn't charity. It was healing. For her and for himself. Lily began calling him Mr. Nate. And though she never asked again for him to be her daddy, sometimes when she held his hand, the silence between them said it all. Chapter 6. The Storm. Before the calm months passed, and Nathaniel's board began questioning his distractions. Profits mattered, they reminded him. Empathy didn't. Then one day, tragedy struck. Elena collapsed while cleaning an office late at night. Overwork, exhaustion. Nathaniel rushed to the hospital, heart pounding, feeling more afraid than he had in his entire life. Lily was asleep in a chair, clutching his jacket. Elena's condition was critical. For hours, Nathaniel sat beside her, praying, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. When she woke, weak but alive, she whispered, "Thank you." For being there for her. Nathaniel shook his head. "You should rest." "No," she said faintly. "You don't understand. You gave my little girl back her laughter. She told me last week, 'Mommy, my daddy came back.'" Tears welled in his eyes. In that moment, he realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes love isn't about being related. It's about showing up. Chapter 7. 1 year later, Lily stood on stage at her school recital. Nathaniel sat in the front row, Elena beside him, healthier and smiling. When Lily's turn came, she held the microphone with confidence beyond her years. "This song," she said, "is for my daddy. He didn't have to be my real one, he just decided to love me anyway." As she began to sing him a soft, trembling version of "You Are My Sunshine," Nathaniel felt tears roll down his cheeks. He wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't asking anymore. They had found something rare and beautiful, a family, born not of blood but of kindness. What love builds years later. Hartwell Enterprises launched a new foundation, the Lily Project, funding education for children of single parents and orphans across the country. When reporters asked Nathaniel why, he simply said, "Because once a little girl reminded me that being successful means nothing if you forget how to care." And every year, without fail, he attended her school events, her birthdays, her graduations, never missing a single one, because one rainy afternoon, a little girl had asked him a question that changed everything. "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy just for one day?" And in answering that question, Nathaniel discovered something far greater than wealth, the power of love that asks for nothing, yet gives everything. The years rolled on like pages in a storybook, sometimes soft, sometimes stormy, but always full of meaning. Nathaniel Cole was no longer the same man who once hid behind glass towers and stock reports. He had learned to smile without rehearsing it, to listen without checking his phone, and to love without reason. Lily had grown too. What began as a child's innocent plea had turned into a bond that neither of them could fully explain, a connection that healed them both. Scene 1. A different kind of CEO. It was a bright morning in Chicago. The glass doors of Hartwell Enterprises opened to reveal something new. Not just workers hurrying to their desks, but laughter. Children's laughter. The Lily Project had expanded, offering after-school programs for kids whose parents worked long hours. Nathaniel often joined them, teaching about dreams and resilience instead of profit margins. Employees whispered sometimes, "That's Mr. Cole, the CEO, sitting on the floor painting with crayons?" But they smiled when they saw the look on his face, the peace of a man who finally understood his purpose. That afternoon, Lily, now 10, burst into his office. "Waving a piece of paper. Guess what, Mr. Nate? I won the city art contest." He looked up, pretending to be surprised. "Let me guess, another masterpiece featuring your dog, Daisy?" She giggled. "No, it's us." He leaned in, studying the painting. It showed a tall man in a suit holding hands with a little girl, both smiling under a big yellow sun. Below it, she'd written, "Love doesn't need matching last names." Nathaniel's throat tightened. He placed the paper on his desk, right next to the framed Forbes cover that once defined his worth. Now it was Lily's drawing that did. The unspoken adoption. Elena watched all this quietly. She had fully recovered and now worked as an office manager, her strength and grace admired by everyone. Yet deep inside, she often wondered how long Nathaniel would stay. He was busy, powerful, admired by the world. Surely, she thought, one day he'd move on. But one evening, as they sat together after dinner, Lily asleep between them, Nathaniel broke the silence. "She changed everything," he said softly, looking at the little girl's peaceful face. "Both of you did," Elena smiled faintly. "You gave her hope." "You gave me hope." He turned to her, his voice steady. "No, Elena, you gave me family." And for the first time, he said what had been in his heart for years. "I'd like to make it official. I want to adopt her." Tears filled her eyes before she could speak. "She's always been yours," she whispered. The courtroom, the day of the hearing, Lily wore her favorite yellow dress, the same color as the sun in her painting. As the judge read through the paperwork, she looked up at Nathaniel. "Are you sure, sir? This is a lifelong commitment," he smiled. "That's exactly why I'm sure." When it was done, Lily turned to him, eyes wide with disbelief. "So, you're really my daddy now?" Nathaniel knelt, just like that first day in the lobby years ago. "I always was," he whispered. She threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying all at once. And for Nathaniel Cole, the man who once believed he had everything, that moment became the richest day of his life. The legacy 10 years later, the city skyline looked the same, but the man standing before it was not. Nathaniel was older now, his hair peppered with silver, but his heart younger than ever. The Lilly Foundation had built schools, shelters, and programs across the country. Each bore a plaque that read, "For the children who dream of being loved." At the annual gala, now a grand tradition, Lily, grown and radiant, took the stage to speak. "My father," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "once told me that kindness can change the direction of a life. He didn't just tell me, he proved it." She turned to Nathaniel, her smile shining. "You didn't just pretend to be my daddy. You became the reason I believe in goodness, in people, in love. Thank you for choosing me." The audience rose in applause. Nathaniel could only wipe his tears. He thought back to that first rainy day, the little girl with the crumpled photo, and the trembling voice. She had asked him for just one day. He had given her a lifetime, and she, without knowing it, had given him back his soul. Some people chase success, thinking it will fill the emptiness inside them. But sometimes, it takes a small voice, a simple question, to remind us what really matters. Because at the end of every life, the true measure of success is not the empire we build, but the hearts we touch along the way. Nathaniel Cole learned that, and he never forgot the words that started it all, the question that changed everything. The years passed softly, like waves folding back into the sea. Nathaniel Cole's life, once made of polished glass and sharp edges, began to bloom with warmth. The man who used to count profits now counted smiles, especially one in particular. Lily had grown taller, her curls still bouncing, her laughter filling rooms that once echoed with silence. Every Saturday morning, she'd run through the glass doors of Hartwell Enterprises, where Nathaniel worked, waving her backpack proudly. The security guards smiled and waved. The entire building seemed to recognize her as its sunshine. Nathaniel would stop meetings just to greet her, pretending to be annoyed, though his heart swelled each time. She'd climb onto his lap and start talking about her school, her drawings, her dreams. He'd listen, truly listen, something he had never learned to do before. And sometimes while she talked, he'd look at her little hands, her joy, her curiosity, and think about the boy he once was, the boy who had no one to listen to him, no one to love him. That pain had built his empire, but her love rebuilt his soul. Elena watched quietly from the sidelines. She'd often stand in the doorway of Nathaniel's office, watching the two of them laugh together. Sometimes she'd feel a knot in her throat, a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. This powerful man, this man who had everything the world could offer, had chosen to sit on the floor coloring with crayons, just to make her daughter happy. Nathaniel began visiting their home often, not as the CEO, but as Nathaniel. He'd bring groceries, help fix the leaking sink, or just share dinner. He found peace there, in the sound of Lily's laughter, in the scent of home-cooked food, in the quiet company of Elena's steady presence. For a long time, Nathaniel didn't realize what was happening. The loneliness that once felt permanent had started to fade. The walls he built around himself were slowly falling, replaced by laughter, warmth, and something he never thought he'd feel again: family. But life, as it always does, tested that fragile happiness. One night, Elena didn't come home. She'd been working overtime, cleaning offices in another district to save up for Lily's future. Nathaniel received the call just after midnight. She'd collapsed at work from exhaustion and was rushed to the hospital. He drove through the city like a man possessed, every red light a blur, his heart pounding with fear. When he reached the hospital, he found Lily asleep in a chair, clutching his jacket. The nurse recognized him immediately. Everyone did. But that night, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a man terrified of losing the only two people who made his life worth living. Hours passed. Machines beeped softly in the dim hospital room. He sat beside Elena's bed, holding her hand, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken in decades. When she finally opened her eyes, she smiled faintly through her exhaustion. "You didn't have to come," she whispered weakly. He shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I had to. Your family." She looked at him for a long time, as if seeing the truth of his words. "Nathaniel," she murmured. "Thank you for being there for her. She told me last week. She said, 'Mommy, my daddy came back.'" The words broke something deep inside him. He turned his face away, his eyes burning. Elena squeezed his hand gently. "You gave her what I couldn't give her, a reason to believe." He stayed until morning. And when the first light touched the hospital window, he made himself a silent promise to never let that little girl feel abandoned again. From that day forward, Nathaniel changed everything. He arranged better working conditions for all janitorial staff, gave Elena paid leave, and made sure she never had to overwork again. But more than that, he made time for Lily, time for moments that couldn't be bought or scheduled. He picked her up from school, helped with her homework, and sometimes when she fell asleep on his shoulder while watching cartoons, he'd whisper, "You're safe now, sweetheart." Years drifted by, and Lily grew into a bright, confident girl. One evening, while Nathaniel and Elena sat watching her paint by the window, he said softly, "She changed everything." Elena smiled. "You changed her life." He looked at her. "No, she saved mine." That night, when Lily had gone to bed, he turned to Elena, nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I want to make it official," he said quietly. "I want to adopt her." Elena froze, her hand over her mouth. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She's always been yours," she whispered. Months later, in a small courtroom filled with sunlight, the judge handed Nathaniel a pen. "Mr. Cole, this will make it official. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" He smiled gently. "I've never been more certain about anything." When the papers were signed, Lily looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Cerise, you're really my daddy now?" He knelt down, just as he did on that first day in the lobby years ago, and smiled through tears. "I always was." She threw her arms around him, laughing through her tears, and the room filled with applause. But for Nathaniel, the world seemed to fall silent. There was only that embrace, that little heartbeat against his chest, that pure love that asked for nothing but changed everything. From then on, Nathaniel wasn't just a CEO. He was a father, a friend, a man who finally understood that the greatest legacy isn't built in boardrooms, but in hearts. Years later, the Lily Foundation grew into a nationwide movement, helping single mothers, funding children's education, and offering shelter to those who had nowhere to go. Every building bore the same inscription near its entrance: "For the children who dream of being loved." And in his office, where once there had been awards and news clippings, now there hung only one picture: a little girl in a yellow dress holding his hand, smiling under a painted sun. When people asked Nathaniel the secret to his success, he'd smile and say, "It's simple. Once a little girl asked me to pretend to be her father. And I said yes." He'd pause, then add softly, "That one yes changed everything, because sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from wealth, power, or genius. They come from a single act of kindness, from showing up when someone needs you most." And somewhere in the echoes of time, if you listened closely, you could still hear that little voice, the voice that had rewritten a man's destiny, whispering with innocent faith, "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy?" Just for one day, he did, and in doing so, he became one forever. Kindness heals. Love beyond blood. Inspire the world. Heart-touching stories.